Imagine it's October 1962. The Soviet Union had just transported nuclear missiles to Cuba, an island nation close enough to the United States that a missile could easily reach Kansas City. Supposedly, there was to be a United States naval blockade around Cuba, but there was no navy. The United Nations had prevented the United States from doing a blockade around Cuba because there was no solid proof that the Soviet Union was moving nuclear missiles to the nation. The Soviets get the go-ahead. The missiles are launched, and the eastern half of America is engulfed in a contamination zone. Everything looks bleak for the nation. Nothing on the eastern seaboard survives. The capital is wiped out. The president is dead. The United Nations had denied the United States the ability to preemptively defend itself. A preemptive strategy for nations can be a beneficial thing. There are critics and protesters of the notion that a preemptive strike, mainly the United Nations Security Council, who believe that unless a nation is on the verge of being attacked, should abstain from any violence toward another nation. States who are affiliated with the UN still have legal rights when it comes to preemptive strategy, being within the law, of course. To understand the benefits of a preemptive strategy, we have to look back in history to see the effect of a preemptive war has on a nation. We also have to consider the critics of a preemptive war and the benefits of a well-thought-out preemptive strategy. Preemptive war has a long history among nations. The United Nations added Article 51 to the Charter, which outlined the steps which may be taken if a nation is attacked until such time that the United Nations may maintain or restore international peace and security. In other words, if a nation is attacked or has sufficient evidence to believe that attack is imminent, the nation has the ability to preemptively strike so as to render the threat useless. If there is not solid proof that a nation is directly in harm's way, they are warrant to a court appearance in front of the United Nations. In 1837, a rebellion occurred in Canada against the British Crown. The United States was officially neutral in the rebellion, although a few Americans supplied the rebels with supplies and weapons, transported by a boat named the Caroline. The British proceeded to destroy the ship, claiming that it was a preemptive strike as the ship would have harmed Britain's chances of winning the rebellion. The then United States Secretary of State, Daniel Webster, wrote a letter to the British ambassador that in order for the destruction of the Caroline to have been justified, the necessity of self-defense was instant, overwhelming, leaving no choice of means and no moment of deliberation. This letter came to be known as the Caroline Test, a set of guidelines adopted by the UN which must be followed if a preemptive strike is to be considered legal by the United Nations. In the history of the United States, never has a preemptive strategy been as important as it was during the Cuban Missile Crisis. When U.S. intelligence learned that the Soviet Union was transporting nuclear missiles to Cuba, the U.S. began to blockade the island nation, claiming that it was considered self-defense and that it was necessary to secure the nation. The United Nations did not wholly agree with the decision made by the U.S., claiming that the blockade did not justify preemptive defense because it did not fully meet the standards of the Caroline Test. The U.S. carried on with the blockade anyway, making sure that the missiles never launched. Preemptive war will, of course, always have its critics. The topic of preemptive war has always been a hot spot among nations. The specific requirements are the platform that critics stand upon. For example, in George W. Bush's strategy to invade Iraq in order to seize the possible WMDs that were stored there, the United States violated the UN Charter. The Bush administration justified the invasion as a preemptive strike because Iraq had possible nuclear missiles as well as a connection to Al-Qaeda, the terrorist organization responsible for the Twin Towers attack on September 11, 2001. According to the Caroline Test, the proclaimed preemptive strike on Iraq was not justified because 1. There was no imminent threat towards the United States concerning nuclear weapons, and 2. There was no direct threat of nuclear war because there was only speculation that Iraq had amassed an arsenal of WMDs, mainly due to the fact that the Iraqi leader Saddam Hussein had denied UN inspectors to the nation's nuclear facilities, which caused the United States to believe that there was a stockpile of nuclear warheads. The justification of the invasion of Iraq was not enough for the United Nations to give the okay. In doing so, this has generated many advocates of peaceful preemptive strikes in the U.S., such as diplomatic negotiations. Another platform that critics stand upon for preemptive war is the political and social repercussions that occur because of it. In Mark R. Amstutz' book, International Ethics, Concepts, Theories, and Cases in Global Politics, he states that in publicly declaring a preemptive strategy, such as the United States did during Operation Iraqi Freedom, it can do two things. It can either deter nations or terrorist organizations from attempting threats, or it can encourage opponents to attack first or to pursue actions with greater secrecy, thereby impeding early detection of threats. He also goes on to say in his book that a policy that neither rejects nor recommends preemption may be the best policy. While the critics of preemptive war have valid points, the benefits of preemptive war outweigh the cons of it. As Abraham Sofire points out in his article entitled On the Necessity of Preemption, it is important to note that a preemptive war is necessary if the strike is against a terrorist organization, such as the Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. The laws of preemptive war do not allow a strike to occur if a nation or body does not present an immediate threat to another nation or body. However, Sofire points out that a nation has every right to preemptively strike a terrorist organization operating out of a country in which the government refuses to stop the organization from attacking, and which happened in Afghanistan. Another advocate of a preemptive war suggests that there is a difference between obligatory and optional wars. The 12th century Jewish scholar Maimonides defined an obligatory war as wars of religion and defense, and optional wars as campaigns extending boundaries. Although somewhat outdated, Maimonides is still correct in saying that there is a difference between a necessary war and a war of choice. In such, according to the Bush administration, the invasion of Afghanistan and Iraq were wars of necessity because the threat of terrorism was too real for them. The United States Conference of Catholic Bishops created a just war theory in which 7 conditions must be met in order for the U.S. to be justified to go to war. These are: the cause must be just, competent authority must be involved, there must be comparative justice, right intention is necessary, probability of success should be considered, proportionality is a necessary consideration, force must be a last resort. This document, which the Catholic bishops created, left much to be interpreted, and if followed, left the country open to imminent attack. For example, in today's world, there is a vast arsenal of weapons that can be fired at any second that is capable of reducing a city to mere rubble, some of which may only take a few minutes to launch and find its target. In that case, it would be detrimental to analyze each of the 7 requirements of the just war theories, as well as the Caroline test, by the time in which a city could be destroyed. Preemptive war is necessary to keep homeland security. Imagine again that it's October 1962. The eastern seaboard is destroyed. The Cold War has ended, with the Soviet Union emerging as a victor. You try to pick up your past life, but it's impossible because the Soviet Union is converging on America, claiming it as its own. Now snap back to reality. There was a U.S. blockade around Cuba, which stopped the missiles from being deployed. Life went on. Without that preemptive self-defense blockade around Cuba, the world we know today would not be the same. Through the historical view of it, to the critics and the advocates of preemptive war, we have seen that preemptive war is a necessity that we must deal with. While it may be illegal in some cases, as having shown just now, it is absolutely necessary in order to effectively defend a nation's security.